And thanks for joining everyone. Charles Moscowitz. Welcome to the program Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 live here at YouTube and at affiliated platforms. Uh, John Gist is my guest. John is a Catholic American writer, editor, teacher, U.S. Constitution patriot. He is a contributor to many academic journals, including the Dispatch, where he has an article up that caught my interest, The Fallow Fields of Academy and the Lost Art of Disputatio. John, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, John, you tackle a very interesting topic here, one that I've been trying to get my arms around, and that is the 1619 project that's been kind of accepted as a part of the curricula for several major city school systems. What is this project about, first of all?
I think it's about, first of all, I think that most people might have heard of it now since President Trump is pushing back on it with his 1776 panel of some pretty heavy duty scholars got together and they're putting together their historical course, because the 1619 project is now backpedaling pretty quickly. First, they said it was history, and that was the actual founding of the nation was 1619, because that was when the first slaves came into this country. Now they took a step back when they were challenged and said, no, it's not really history, it's journalism. It's not meant to be history. And now they've even stepped back just recently in the past few days and said, no, we didn't really mean that it was the founding 1619. 1776, of course, is the founding of the United States. So that they are getting pushed from a lot of different angles, but it's interesting just to follow how it evolved in the first place. And so what it is, it's an attempt to retell American history, not based on historical fact, but based on conjecture. So when they say it's journalism, they're saying they want to shift the national narrative, because they're coming out of this postmodern camp of, I don't know if people, most people might not have heard of critical theory, but they've probably heard of critical race theory now, because President Trump has pushed back on that pretty hard and said to stop that stuff in federal training programs, because it was getting ridiculous.
Yeah. I saw something about that, and that President Trump himself noted that these so-called critical race theory claimed that such concepts as success, financial prosperity, business, family, the intact nuclear family, that these things were to be seen as code words for racism. And it became pretty obvious that their view was the most rank form of racism. Are they suggesting that African Americans aren't interested in success and family and values? I mean, somehow it's this kind of jingoistic, old world, white man's burden, Rudyard Kipling kind of racism that you find amongst white elites that is becoming more and more apparent. And I think that's why, especially now with an election coming up, you don't hear too many people challenging President Trump on his rescinding that funding, because they know that's going to open a big can of worms in terms of having people actually look at what this critical race program is teaching people. But their ideology is becoming very pervasive in our culture. And the 1619 Project is obviously a part of it. It's like everything emanates from racism. Everything emanates from the dialectic of a conflict between the races. Karl Marx talked about the conflict of classes, and it was a strictly economic matter. I think that shifted in the early part of the 20th century with Frantz Fanon, who was a communist thinker from Martinique, who wrote the book The Wretched of the Earth, where he said it's not a conflict that we'll work on in terms of class, but it's one based on race and region. And it's that idea that permeates now the radical agenda, that we're to be divided based on race lines, that one race is exploiting the other race, just like under Marx, the bourgeoisie exploited the proletariat. It's a big conspiracy theory. And that therefore there has to be a conflict wherever you can find it, and a kind of a grinding together of these two parts in order to create a new whole, which is communism.
Yes, agreed. I think that's very very well said. But I think that a lot of this terms get, there's another thing that sort of came out of critical theory, which is post-colonial theory. And they come up with these terms, like all these terms like success, hardworking, logic, reason. Those are all words of the oppressive West, and they're just used to oppress all other peoples. But I agree with you totally that wouldn't this be just a slam to anybody? So nobody else likes reason or hard work or success. So it was just insulting the very people it's supposed to be uplifting. So there's all kinds of contradictions and internal a lot of these times when in the article that I wrote, I'm talking about why people can't communicate anymore. And I have this sneaking suspicion that while you're not seeing pushback against President Trump's stopping this kind of training in federal agencies is because they don't have an argument. Their argument won't stand up to the oppressive logic of the West, and it will just fall in on itself. And as we're also seeing that with Portland, that's a crazy place over there. But the mayor there, he was one of these woke people, and anything goes, let them all out. And then they came after him. They did that. They right. Turn on each other. They need an enemy to survive. Without an enemy, their movement falls apart.
Well, you're bringing up, of course, the great paradox of their movement, which is that once they come to power, the first people that they liquidate are their own. I mean, you could look at what Lenin did to the intellectuals of Russia. You could look at what the socialistic Hitler did in Germany with the Night of the Thousand Knives. They'll go after their own intellectuals once they come to power, and they cleanse them and then move on to a greater goose step toward this bizarre utopian idea of a world ant colony. They are undermining or trying to undermine Western understanding that goes back to the Bible, and that the Catholic Church very clearly articulates in its concept of logos, which derived from the Greek philosophers and which merged in the Gospel of John with the teachings of Jesus. And that is that there is an order to the universe. We can know what existence is to a certain extent, even though we're only images of God, and that extent may be limited, but there are things we can know and we can discern. And that there is an order, and that they want to overthrow that order by claiming that all of the values that we're talking about, which are natural and which exist even in the animal kingdom in many cases, are artificial, are manufactured by this great conspiracy theory. The people in power, the exploiters. This is Marxist theory of exploitation, that somehow things like family, things like love, things like attachment, things like loyalty, things like sovereignty and trade and property. These are all manufactured. These are all what Marx called false consciousness. They're made up by exploiters who want to fool us. That's why Marx referred to religion as the opiate of the masses. It's somehow something that was created to fool people, to put us asleep while we were being exploited. And I think that that's the underlying philosophy that's going on here. With this idea that they're going to openly and brazenly use false information to recast and reportray American society. America is the great Satan to them. They agree with the Iranian mullahs, strangely enough, and that they want to undermine that great Satan because that great Satan supports and defends and protects all of these natural institutions.
Yes, and to follow up on that, like Solzhenitsyn was quoted as saying in one of his speeches, he said, basically, I think Marx said something similar. This is basically a rebellion against God. So it's a rebellion against the entire Western tradition from Heraclitus forward. To tell you, they don't like it. They see it as oppressive. They want to make a utopia on Earth. What they don't seem to understand, or their understanding goes astray, it's with this postmodern notion. Pope Benedict called this the dictatorship of relativism, is that they think that language creates reality rather than describes reality. They think that they can actually change reality by telling us what to think. And I think this is indicative, or it's a part of all these totalitarian movements. They want to destroy your past, get rid of all these statues. You don't have a past because your past is evil, and we must cleanse you. It's a tale of revenge without redemption. There can be no redemption for the sins of the past. They never talk about the Civil War or Abraham Lincoln. in the sense that a lot of people died. And it's a complex issue, slavery in the United States. It's not just a cut and dried thing. They knew, the founding fathers knew it was not good, Thomas Jefferson in particular, but they also couldn't just yank it out all at once, or the fledgling nation would collapse. It was a fragile nation. And so there was a touch and go. And Lincoln happened to be a brilliant politician. So he finally, it was a terrible thing though, a civil war over slavery, among other things, but mostly over slavery, was fought in this country, and we moved forward. Civil progress is a slow thing. It's not a quick thing. It should never be a real quick thing, or you get the French Revolution and things like this, which all this, I think that's what they want. I get the feeling that they want all these protesters in the street and this BLM, they want people to strike back at them. If you see how they get up in people's faces with their phones, just daring them or just trying to trigger them so somebody strikes them so they can then they want a revolution.
Right. It's a revolutionary movement. It's backed by very powerful forces, like big money forces like George Soros and many of the so-called top 1%ers that the Occupy Wall Street used to talk about. These people are very much involved in it. They work it from the boardroom. It has kind of the scissors effect. The top scissors is the boardroom, the people like George Soros, and the bottom scissors are the street agitators taking all the money and getting the media support with their various friends in high places, and that they control the high ground of our culture. They really, and you talk about moral relativism, which Pope Benedict accurately described. It's that nothing is real, nothing can be identified, everything is in flux. There's including concepts like good and bad. There's no such thing as now as men and women. Everything can be whatever you say it is. Everything exists because you created. You are the king of the universe. Your reality is reality. Your morality is morality, and anyone who says otherwise is a bigot, is prejudiced,
or is an oppressor. Yeah, anybody exactly. That wants to appeal to common sense or anything is sort of an oppressor. And this, I've taught in universities too long now. I'm trying to get out. There's very few of us sort of more conservative types left. But I always sort of tell this tale that the critical theory, you're probably familiar with the Frankfurt School.
Yeah, the Frankfurt School. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they fled Germany to come over here, and they wondered why communism got stopped, why the revolution stopped in Western Europe. And they concluded basically it was because of the Protestant work ethic, but they wondered what went wrong. So they started putting these weird Nietzsche and Freud and Marx all together and mixing them up and coming up with these weird, basically communist theories. But out of that, as time progresses, now we get in the 80s and 90s, you get this blossoming into post-colonial theory, which I suggested earlier. They say that all these words, like the Smithsonian actually has that out. These are bad words of oppression. Reason, logic, hard work. They're
right. I mean, it's a gigantic conspiracy theory, and you accurately point to the Frankfurt School and people like Theodore Adorno, who wrote a book about claiming basically in a nutshell that all American middle class is secretly fascist and that we don't know it. And then he points to all these. It's almost like the way the sovereign citizen movement works. Every little word can be meaning something and having double meanings, and it gets into this very minute and very at times bizarre worldview of conspiracy that they like to point a finger of claiming that conservatives believe in conspiracies, and they do, but because some conspiracies are true, you have to do it responsibly. But their entire worldview is based on conspiracy. Everything is an attempt to subjugate people, and this whole obviously a modern example of their great conspiracy theories, which was promoted by their entire establishment, was that President Donald Trump is a Russian spy.
Yeah.
This was mainstream. This was promoted by the media almost on a daily basis for year after year. And but yet they point a finger of anybody that questions them as being a conspiracist. Their worldview is conspiracy based. Nothing really exists at its core. It's nihilistic. Nothing is real. Nothing exists, and that anyone who identifies something as being a basic and true axiom based upon thousands of years of human experience, they're somehow prejudiced, that they're somehow bigoted, and that they have to be denounced.
Yeah, I trace this usually. I teach philosophy classes, and some of especially the freshmen, it's sort of to be expected, but right now they embrace nihilism. So we're reading a book called All Things Shining by Herbert Dreyfus, which is a Heidegger scholar, but it's for laymen. It's about how do you find meaning in a nihilistic world? Where do you look for meaning? I don't agree with their conclusions, but they lay out the history very well. And you get to Nietzsche. I think this is all you can. Nietzsche's played a significant part in my life because I read Thus Spake Zarathustra when I was about 15 and immediately dropped out of high school and got in trouble for a while. But so I've been fascinated with Nietzsche, and now I'm sort of repulsed by Nietzsche, although you have to deal with him because he was right on some things. But it's ultimately not nihilistic. It's a will to power. That's all this movement is. It's purely a will to power, and that's the end game, and that's the goal. And whatever falls in its way, falls in its way, because that's all there is. Nietzsche says that's all there is power. That's it. Nothing else is real.
So then the entire force of nature in man is the desire for power.
Yep.
And, I think that Nietzsche, going along with Sigmund Freud's idea, which is that everything is based on desire, these are the two horsemen of the leftist apocalypse, really, in a way. And that it's devoid of any kind of objective and external code of morality or ethics. It is separated from the most fundamental idea that an individual has a right to find their own meaning in life and determine their own future to a high degree based on what's possible in nature, and that we're imperfect. And it certainly denies God.
It denies you can trace this sort of back to Aristotle and his prime mover. And the best thing we can do, and Aquinas is a major player that gets overshadowed in way too many universities because he may be kind of boring to read, but he's the most thorough there is. And the whole contention that we are created for an end, and that's to contemplate, if you want to go back to Platonic terms, the good. And so that's part of Western tradition. No, it's not just, I'm not just trapped a prisoner in my own consciousness. I live in a world. I don't create the world. I live in the world. And I can learn things from the world. Like the ancient Greeks said, logos was in the universe. It wasn't just the property of humans.
That's right. It is an existing and objective order of the universe that was created by God. The book of Genesis describes it perfectly, and as does the Gospel of John as well. And I'm saying this. I'm not a Christian, but I respect that gospel. I mean, it's an incredible view of logos and of the order of the universe. How did you, John Gist, get by as a philosophy professor at a college?
Well, you can tune it out. Most of the stuff. I don't know how I really. It's driven me a little bit bonkers, especially as of late. In a sense, I'm teaching online now because of COVID, so that's a godsend, really, because the universities are overwhelmingly, and I just work in a little state university. It's no big deal. I'm not in an Ivy League school or anything, but it too. I'm in New Mexico, and it too is inundated with these left-wing thinking. That's just the norm. And if you're different from that, you feel kind of alone sometimes.
Well, I think that it was a deliberate, gradual ascension of leftist thinkers that really started with John Dewey and the so-called frontier thinking educators, and that gradually over time they have, by attrition, weeded out anyone who doesn't agree and worked their friends and colleagues up the rat line into positions, to the point where here in Boston, where I am, even Boston Magazine did a survey of how liberal colleges were, and they found that Massachusetts, where I am, and New England has like 97, 98% liberals. I mean, it's really become a bastion of leftist thinking, and it doesn't surprise me because colleges and administrators and professors, they are a bit removed from the realities of making a living and practical existence. They do, in a way. I know that it's a euphemism, but it is a bit of an ivory tower, and I think it attracts that kind of like thinking where you can live in this theoretical bubble and not really have to square that with the real world.
I agree totally. I grew up in Wyoming, and I've worked ranches and all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty connected to the land still, and I'm still in the West here. But boy, I'll tell you, you can get in these universities and you will just sit there and you'll say, does anybody not see that this just defies all common sense? All these countless committee meetings and that never get anything done. It's maddening on many levels, but it's dangerous as well because look, all the kids go to college, right? They're encouraged to go to college and they're exposed to 95% of liberal thinking. And the schools of education are some of the worst, in my opinion, of this multiculturalism, which is just another term for relativism and balkanization, as far as I'm concerned. But then then it infiltrated into the public school systems, as we see now. Some crazy stuff goes on in public schools, especially in California, apparently.
Right, and I think that the schools of education have almost a monopoly on who gets to go become a teacher, and you have to go through sort of a hazing in those schools. You have to pass a litmus test, and before you can graduate, and so you have them, churning out a certain type of person who is part of that agenda or who internalized any opposition a long time ago in order to get ahead because they saw which side the bread was buttered on. I mean, I don't even necessarily blame them. If you want to have a career in this world, you I suppose you have to make compromises. I mean, I don't give a damn because I'm not in that world, but I mean, I can understand. I can be sympathetic to it. What I find also disturbing is that this is becoming more true with Catholic schools and colleges. I mean, I look to the Catholic Church as being a bulwark of moral certitude and having a very, very clearly developed methodology and ideology of morals and ethics based on thousands of years of experience. And yet, when I look at the Catholic colleges, they are better, but they're not. They've kind of moved away from the faith and a little bit more in the direction of this socialistic agenda. And I particularly point a finger at Notre Dame under Theodore Hesburgh, and I think that there was a major departure, a kind of an Americanization, I suppose. That's what the conservative Catholics call it. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree, and I think that our current pope, although he says a lot of good things. I don't have anything really against him, except he does tend to hedge on things. He's not clear on many of things that should be fairly clear. And he tends to be the sort of that South American socialistic approach rather than, I think he's the first pope that wasn't from Europe. And he definitely has that sort of outlook. And he's where Benedict and John Paul II were, vocal against totalitarian regimes and socialism. They came out and they said that's not going to work because it just doesn't work if you just look at history. And they lived through the horrors of all that. But the Pope is a little bit easier. And I think that a lot of the Catholic schools have gone somehow. I don't know how it happened, but you're absolutely right. In my opinion, they've gotten a lot softer, and Notre Dame in particular teaches some pretty strange things now, and they are allowed to teach strange things where they wouldn't have 20 years ago even.
Right. I mean, rumor has it, and people that from Argentina say that this pope is a Peronist, but and that's his background. So that's the context. But he is the pope, and the church. I think he has to somehow somewhat be within the canon, so to speak. I hope.
Yeah,
Um,
he's not completely out of bounds, but he's just soft. He blurs things like the like critical theory. There's another little offshoot of critical theory you've probably heard of called queer theory. Now, on its surface, it looks like it's just LGBTQ, get people to tolerate that behavior and things, but it's much more insidious when you start looking into it. Their mission is to blur boundaries between not just gender, but everything. I mean, they don't want anything to be defined. I mean, it's sort of in your face irrationality. They are striving to be irrational, if that makes sense.
Right.
Within
And
it,
not only that, but they wrap themselves in the garment of science as they do it. And it's
with,
completely unscientific. It's not observable in nature. It's science is understanding the nature of God's world. I mean, it's the physical world. I mean, there's not. It's not. What they're doing is contrary to that. I mean, the idea of blurring identity and what is and A is B and B is C is classic socialism. In that the goal of socialism is to tear down inequality, and which is a natural condition. We're all unequal. I mean, I'll never be as good a baseball player as Carl Yastrzemski. As a kid, I admired Yastrzemski, but I know that that's not going to happen. I mean, right? We all have things that we'd like to be, but we're not going to be. But it doesn't mean we can't strive toward it and learn on the process. But we're all different. We all have different skills and different talents. We're born equal and we die equal, and we have an equal soul and we have an equal ability to know God. But on the practical plane, we have different circumstances. We have different aspects of luck and chance. We have different aspects of our personality, and we have different moral values. And the result is that we are different. We're not equal, never will be equal, cannot be made equal. And they just have this idea that if you tear down those elements which make us different and make us unequal, then they're going to create this one world beehive. And it's bizarre. It's completely contrary to human nature. And it's
it
evil.
is. It is, and if you think about it, are you familiar with Star Trek, the Borg?
No.
The Picard Star Trek, it's these evil entities that you will assimilate. Resistance is futile. But it's sort of like that. And the conservatives actually embrace the way you just put it is perfect diversity. We're not equal. We're all different. We're all thrown into the world. And you can't choose some things. You can't choose what time you were thrown into, who your parents were, how tall you are, how well you're able to play basketball, for example. But you are able to explore your limits and find out what you might be good at, and go in those directions. So we embrace that. If you just embrace that we're not equal, isn't that a natural diversity that is commonsensical rather than theory?
Well, because it comports to reality. This is what human nature is, and we're imperfect beings. They want to have a perfected world, and their idea of perfection is very bizarre. But either way, it's not possible. Only God is perfect. We're images of God. We're not God. And of course, this conspiracy goes back to. I mean, I think that Whittaker Chambers, the former American communist who became anti-communist and who turned on the party, and he was the lead witness in the Hiss trial back in the 1940s. He wrote a book called Witness, where he talks about this in the first paragraph, the letter to his children, where he notes that communism is the world's second oldest religion, in that it was embraced by Adam and Eve when they partook of the tree of knowledge. They decided we can be like God. We can overthrow God. We can defy God. We can separate ourselves, and we can know all things. And then they were exiled after that, and we've been exiled ever since. We can't know God. We can't know all things. Only God knows all things. And yet, this conspiracy that they entered into with the serpent is a conspiracy that has been entered into by groups of people in every generation ever since. They want to overthrow God. They want to become like God. They want to recreate man in their image as if they know everything. They call themselves up as quote unquote enlightened. And it's nothing new. We're going to deal with it in every generation. We're dealing with it now. We've dealt with it in the past. I don't think it's as bad now as it's been in other times, like under the times of Nazism and communism, which were this part of this movement. But it's still here. It's what we're looking at in this next election. I mean, this is it's part of the human condition, and I think the best antidote, I should say, is exposure and identification. And you need people to step up to the plate and tell truths and reveal. Say the emperor has no clothes, right?
I totally agree with you, and I think that's one thing that, for whatever reason, our side has been sort of quiet about this, and that's how it got infiltrated into the school system so deeply. I mean, it's penetrated into all aspects. The federal government. I don't know if you heard about that, the White Fragility, that book, White Fragility. And
What's the deal with that? I have heard of it, but what is that about?
it's about white people are inherently racist, and if you say you're not, that proves you're racist. And if you don't say it,
Yeah.
it's one of those circular arguments. But they were having trainings on that, and federal government was having people take her training. She was making a lot of money. People were making a lot of money.
Oh my.
But if we
That's
just,
like it's like it reminds me of the Salem witch trials.
well,
You
it
know,
is. I mean,
if you say you're not a witch, that proves you are, and you're put to death. If you say you are a witch, then you're put to death.
yeah, it's completely circular reasoning. Their whole argument is there's another book out that hit the New York Times bestseller that's called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And the premise is either there's no in between. It's an either or thing. You're either a racist or you're not a racist. There's no other option. All action, human activities are either racist or they're not racist. And on their face, I can laugh at it, but it's a bestseller. People are buying this stuff and they're reading it. And we really need to call them out and see if they will debate us, because that's where you can really win this. I have a little anecdote here. I was running the philosophy club at the university. I was the sort of the overseer of it. And then we have this other entity on campus, or we did, it's no longer exists now, but it was called the Gender Equity Center. And so the philosophy guys wanted to debate them on what safe space meant, what debate about safe spaces on campus. Their premise was that you shouldn't have any safe spaces on campus because it's a free exchange of ideas. It should be physically safe, of course, but not intellectually safe. It should be dangerous intellectually, a dangerous place. So their person came, and they were asked to define what was a safe space. And they said, we can't define it. It depends totally on context. It could mean anything to anybody. And the debate was over. If you can't define your terms, the debate is over. And so it was a very short debate. But that's what they do. They just, if they're challenged, they either call you a name or they run.
Right. Well, they lie. I mean, this is. I've interviewed. I mean, I used to do a lot of interviews from people. I like to interview people on both sides, and I particularly have always been interested in people on the extreme ends of both sides. And when I interview people on the left and I challenge them, they'll either lie or they'll run away. They'll make it up. They'll change their stripes. They'll become ultra conservative if they have to, and anything to win, anything to get the argument. And of course, they usually save the hand grenade for the last few seconds, and they pull the plug. They pull the pin and throw it at you as they're going off the air.
then they run. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But so
anyway,
if more people could see that happen, so I'm thank you for doing this show and doing things like that, because if it just doesn't stand, I don't think common sense, at least I hope so. Like I said, I'm from Wyoming. It's a pretty common sense place. I don't think common sense is dead, but lately I've been wondering.
It's scary. It's really scary what you see out there. And, all we can do is just hope enough people become genuinely woke and in time too. So, John, where can people read your excellent articles? And do you want to send any my viewers and listeners to a website?
I'm having a website built right now, because one thing I'm trying to get out of academia, because I just can't. I'm telling you, I really can't take it anymore.
So let me just interject here and point out that the COVID virus offers opportunity for people like yourself. When you get people out of the classrooms, I think that people are doing a more online learning, more. It's almost like a return to apprenticeships and to there's a kind of a real education. I mean, there are certain positive elements to this that are unforeseen, that I think can be taken advantage of by genuine intellectuals like yourself.
I think I'm going to try to take advantage of it. So I'm going to have. The site's not up, but it should be up in October. It'll be called Creative Conservative Consulting, and so there will be various things that I offer. Maybe it'll get me out of the academy, and I'll be a happy guy. I've been. For my latest writing, I've been writing in Catholic World Report, Imaginative Conservative. I've been in Faith and Culture. There's some old books that I have. I haven't written a book in a while, but I'm working on one, so that's all going well. Excellent. And I have been writing a lot lately with this COVID thing, and it's really got me feeling better, to tell you the truth. And I get to talk to people like you, and I feel a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, there's as I say, there is a silver lining to all of it. Out of this thing can come good if we understand the good and how to bring the good out. So, John Gist, I want to thank you for joining me. Very interesting talk. I really appreciate it. Great talking with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.